The previous section looked at different types of change, how we respond to it, and why it's sometimes experienced as a bit scary. And this section moves on from that to look at strategies we might use to manage our responses to change. So there are 5 ways we might do that listed on this slide, and we're going to look at each of those in turn now. Before we do that, though, here's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek strategy. Ignore it. I invite you here to watch the first 2 minutes of this absolutely fascinating video. You may have seen this sort of thing before. It's a woman who has decided to ignore how things have changed over the last 70 years and to actually live her whole life, as far as she's able, as if it was still the 1950s. So when you watch it, think about how you might use this with students, maybe, how you might develop the theme of change with students of different ages, how things have changed, what it would be like to live like this, what you would miss, what you would prefer, and so on. With older students, you could also use the whole idea of kind of progression, asking, is it always a good thing? You can explore whether progress is always positive, so in the context of environmental concerns, global warming, and so on. There's a whole load of stuff there that you could use this for. But for the moment, maybe just watch a couple of minutes and see how many things you can list that have changed since the 1950s that are shown in this video, just for a bit of fun. So enjoy. This particular part of the topic links to a number of progression steps, again, mainly within What Matters Statement 2. And here it's kind of the focus on regulating emotions, which is what the strategies of managing change are often concerned with. And again, in the SEAL materials, there's the similar kind of progression as the theme develops. And again, these can be found in the overview to each theme in the primary booklets. So strategy 1 is ask, share ideas. And common strategy in SEAL is to get children to feel safe enough to vocalise their worries, in this case about change, and to ask peers or adults or families what might help. This is a lovely little activity here, which again, thank you to Bradford for this example. This is actually an activity that's used in the silver set of small group activities. Children sit in a circle and they say what their worries are about moving to their new class in September. They hold a ball of string, and anybody who puts their hand up when they've said what their worry might be, they throw the ball of string to that person, and that person tells them what they think might help with that particular worry. And the sort of throws of the string are obviously very visual for the children involved in the group, but they can also be recorded in a way similar to that shown on the slide, so that children can refer back to the answers when they're worried. So nice little example of that kind of fun interactive nature of these quick sort of warm-up SEAL materials. The Year 4 materials they suggest a number of ways of finding out and sharing ideas about change. These are some of them here. Share what we feel when we think about different changes, sharing ideas about what can help us, maybe inviting somebody into the class to discuss moving either to another country or from another town, how they manage that change. Taking home goal set activities, which have kind of activity sheets about how family members have managed change in the past, and making group posters of survival strategies when they're feeling challenged by a particular change that's coming up. This activity, again from the Year 4 activity, from the Year 4 materials, encourages children to remember that impact that thoughts and feelings have on our behaviour, particularly in the context of change here. So elsewhere, they learn ways of challenging and changing their thoughts through reframing them, which in turn impacts on their behaviour. So this kind of activity, you look at a change and then you look at the children's thoughts around it, their feelings around it, and how they might behave in bearing in mind those thoughts and feelings that they're having. And of course, this also helps to develop an understanding of their own behaviour, but also the behaviour of other people and their empathy towards other young people who might be going through big changes in their life. Strategy 3 is remembering what skills you've used in the past. And this is a lovely little activity here I really like. It's a development of an idea from a Year 4 activity. And it's really, it's a key strategy for developing resilience in all sorts of situations, which SEAL shares with a number of other approaches. And it's just to encourage learners to consider what skills and qualities they've brought to bear in similar situations in the past. And this kind of little activity here provides a focus for learners to explore what they've done in the past. So you display a range of super skills on the interactive whiteboard, or however you're able to do it, and then in pairs, each of the children thinks about an unwelcome change they've experienced in their life, and partner A talks to partner B about how they manage that for 2 minutes. And then partner B selects one or more of the super skills that are listed and kind of presents it or offers it to their partner and says, I think you have this super skill. And then they swap around and do it the other way around. So quite a nice way of focusing what they have done in the past. Strategy 4 is really about remembering and recapping on the ways that the children know about coping with strong feelings, because managing change is really about finding ways to manage those strong feelings. One of those is some of the key learning. So one of those is knowing about fight or flight, understanding why we experience strong feelings, which in itself can help us to manage them and to feel less stressed by those feelings, to know and to understand what's happening in the body and the brain about when we get anxious. That can also help us to manage it just by understanding that. One of the crucial strategies that SEAL develops throughout all of the themes, and is particularly relevant here, is that spotting the signs when we're beginning to get the feeling before we get overwhelmed by it. So whether that feeling's anxiety or anger, being able to spot the sign, doing those kind of body maps of how does it feel when we start to experience these strong emotions. And then recapping on those ways that children have shared about calming down and managing our feelings through mindfulness, grounding activities, distraction, and so on. Okay, so this activity we're actually going to have a go at because I think it's rather nice, and it's the final strategy really, and it's exploring what makes change easier or harder to cope with. And it was developed in a secondary school to illustrate some of those characteristics of change. You'll see what I mean as we go through it. So the children are given a kind of stressometer of change, or they have a mental stressometer of change similar to the one on the slide here, and you ask them what number their particular stressometer of change might be on if it was them that their nan was speaking to, and their nan tells them when they get home from school one day, put this new uniform on tomorrow morning, you're going to a new school. You tell your nan that you want to stay at your old school, but she says, bad luck, that's not possible. It seems that this is a change that's going to happen, whether you like it or not. So what the activity involves, once they've decided what sort of stress level, presumably a very high reading on their stressometer, you're going to kind of read out some changes that Nan might have made to the way she approached this situation, and they're going to think about whether their stressometer would go up or down in relation to the change that Nan made. So we're going to try it out really. So I'll say, would it be better if Nan had, and then I'll read the statement and we'll have a think, or you can have a think about the appropriate characteristic of change that it demonstrates. Sorry, I'm making it sound a bit complicated. It's not, you'll see. So, would it be better if your Nan had told you about the change 6 months before? And the answer, of course, is yes, because you'd have had time to get used to it. It would become an expected change. We have some warning of it. Would it be better if your Nan had told you the reason that you had to change is because she's changing where she works and she won't be able to pick you up anymore? So this presumably would also reduce your level of stress because we understand the reason for the change. Even if we don't like it, we don't agree with it, we do understand the reason. Would it be better if, for example, you had some warning of it and your friend tells you a little bit more about this school, and you go online together and you get some information about it? Again, we would hope that this would bring down the stressometer of change because we have information about the change. Would it have been less stressful, better, if you were allowed to decide whether you wanted to start before half term or after half term? And this would demonstrate that having some control over the change, how the change happens, or can choose some aspect of it, might also reduce our stress level around change. Would it have been better if you had had a chance to visit the school and meet your new head of year before you started at the new school? Would it be better if you know that they have a brilliant rugby team and you're invited to try out, for example, for the year 9s? And again, we would hope that this would also reduce the stress level of this change because we're able to become a little bit familiar with the new situation and we're able to see positive aspects of that situation. Would it be better if you get a card with everybody saying, keep in touch before you leave your old school, and ways that they'd like you to keep in touch with them? And of course, again, this is a way that we can reduce stress if we're able to say goodbye, or what we might call achieve some closure of the old before we move on to the new. So after the kind of discussion, I hope that gives you an idea. I didn't do that very well, I'm sorry. But after any discussion generated by that activity, you can kind of summarise aspects of change that make things easier or harder. And the next slide shows one way that we might do that. So I'll quickly flash that one up for you. So you can summarise by kind of looking at these aspects of change. So change is less stressful generally if we expect it. We have some warning. We understand the reason for the change. We have information about the change. We have some control over how the change happens, or we choose some aspect of it. So we might not be able to change the fact that our parents want to move, but it might be less stressful if we can help choose the house we move to, or choose the colour of our new room, and so on. We're able to become a little bit familiar with the new situation. So in a new school scenario, visiting and finding out a little bit more about it. If there are some positives about the change, some things we're looking forward to about it, and if we're able to say goodbye to achieve some closure to the old before moving on to the new. So saying goodbye to old friends and so on. The final one I think that is also important is that we can see that some things are going to stay the same. So we may be moving school, but we'll be staying with the same family or in the same foster home and so on. So I found this quite a useful little checklist. So when young people come to us with a change that they're facing, to actually go through this as a checklist and to see whether there are any of these things that there's any movement on that they could do something about to make the change less stressful for them. So quite a nice little checklist and a fun little activity to do and perhaps to develop with older children and young people. So lots of supporting resources if we're looking to develop the theme. They fit very easily into this focus on managing change at all different ages. So just going to show a few here, using books read aloud, using the Beano resources that we talked about before. Lots of YouTube videos. We'll have a look at one of those as an example. We're not going to look at this now, but this is a really lovely little short picture books about things that change and things that stay the same. So lots and lots of books to read aloud on YouTube for all different ages, and some of them listed in the resource sheet that accompanies this collection of videos. This is again the Beano and the Young Minds collaboration on the materials mentioned earlier. So what sort of things can help us to cope with change, getting support. I won't read these all out, but you've got them in the on the slide, talking to our friends, preparation, which we kind of talked about in the last activity, finding out what you can about it and so on. Remembering positive past experiences, another strategy we've looked at, understanding that things can't be rosy all the time and change is part of growing up. Sorry, I've moved on here. This is a useful one that I think, a useful video around change. It's not very long, about 3 minutes. And again, it summarises a lot of strategies in a scenario that perhaps older primary, secondary, younger secondary students can relate to. So this is about one boy, Jamie's experience of change, and it offers a whole range of strategies for dealing with it, distraction, grounding activities, what they call emotional release, thought challenges, and different ways of kind of looking after yourself when you're having a hard time. So perhaps watch that for as long as you feel is appropriate. Older learners, you might explore quotes such as this as part of a plenary or a review. What does this quote mean? When you can't change the direction of the wind, adjust your sails. There's several kind of quotes along these lines, and thinking about what that means and what sort of change is it referring to, how does it link to the strategies that we've been looking at for managing change, and so on. You might like to pause the presentation now to consider undertaking the tasks suggested on the slide. Again, just to emphasise, it's really important that as adults we undertake this kind of learning ourselves. It's not just about cognitive knowledge, it's about emotional response and doing the activities ourselves, so that we develop our own social and emotional skills, but also it improves our empathy for when we're asking learners to undertake.